And we have clients who will say to us, look, Bob, I will never buy a property from you. But if I ever sell, you'll be my first call. And that's okay. I'm okay with that because you can't be all things to all people. And they actually did a study and showed that our transactions produced prices that were 31% above the rest of the market.
No way.
3, 2, 1,
All right. Today, we probably have one of our most prominent guests ever in Deals and Dollars history, Bob Knakal, the #1 real estate broker in the history of New York City, in excess of $20 billion in sales, and having sold his own brokerage company to Cushman and Wakefield for over $100 million. Bob, it is a true pleasure to have you on the show today.
So great to be here. Happy to be with you guys.
Bob, can you kind of just share with us your journey into the real estate industry and how you became the #1 broker?
Sure. Well, I thank you for the accolades. I think I've sold more buildings than any other broker in the history of New York, or at least that's what people tell me. But I don't have the highest dollar volume, that's for sure. But, I've been, last Sunday, I started my 40th year in this business.
Wow.
Which kind of blew me away. It snuck up on me. I didn't realize it. But so I'm in year 40 now and have loved every second of it. And I got into it completely by accident. I was a freshman. I'll take you back to 1981. I'm a freshman at the Wharton School. Want to be the next Gordon Gekko like every other Wharton kid. So put my resume together during spring break. I drive around Bergen County, which is where I grew up in a little town called Maywood. I'm dropping my resume off at every investment bank and commercial bank I see. Come out of a Payne Weber office in Hackensack. Across the hall, I see Coldwell Banker. I walk in with my resume thinking the place is a bank. They called me later that day wanting to set up an interview for the next day. So I set up the interview, and this is 1981, so I can't look this bank up on the internet. So I go to the library, and I look up Coldwell Banker. See, it's a real estate company. I'm like, oh, shit, I don't want to get into real estate. I'm not going to go on this interview. But they were the only ones hiring college kids for the summer. Took the job. Absolutely loved it. It was a great environment, a bunch of young, hardworking people. Seemed like they were having a lot of fun, making a lot of money. I spent my first summer there in what they called the data bank program, and I was driving around Morris County logging every commercial property I saw. And I went back my second summer and actually ran that summer internship program for them. Third summer, I got my New Jersey real estate license, and I was what we called a runner back then, as an assistant basically to a senior broker, a guy named Tom Mullaney, who's still a good friend of mine and still working with CB in New Jersey. And I was showing space to industrial tenants. And then when I got out of school in '84, I started working with CB in Manhattan.
Wow. It was a complete mistake.
Complete mistake. If I didn't see Coldwell Banker across the hallway, I probably never would have gotten into the real estate business.
That's absolutely amazing. God had a plan for you, man.
And no doubt.
That's crazy. So, but you started out, I guess, in commercial real estate at Coldwell Banker.
Yeah, well, when I got to CB, I showed up my first day on the job, July 16th of '84. Talked to the boss. He's like, hey, Paul Massey just got out of a training program. Why don't you follow him around, and he'll show you what's going on here. And at the time, CB had about 60 brokers that were leasing office space, 20 that did retail store leasing, and there were 4 people in the building sales group, 3 of whom had 20 years of experience. Paul, who just got out of a training program, and it was very clear to us that the guys with 20 years of experience weren't going to spend a lot of time with us. So literally day 2 on the job, we were having lunch together, and we said, look, let's just work together, split everything 50-50, see how that goes. And that was the start of a 30-year partnership.
Wow. That's crazy. That's amazing.
I actually had a similar internship. My first real estate internship ever was at Cressa. They did tenant lease up. They represented tenants, right? And I had to do the exact same thing. I had to sneak into office buildings. I had to pretend like I was an employee in one of the companies. Take pictures of all the office tenants. Bring it back into a database and verify the owner's phone
Yeah,
number.
you could do that back in those days because pre 9/11, you didn't have all this high security and everything else. So you literally in New York, you could go in. That was the way you canvassed. You had a clipboard and you walked into an office building, got on the elevator, went up to the top floor, and just got off at every floor and talked to every tenant, tried to get a decision maker, and that's what the office leasing guys did.
Yeah,
that was the way it was done in those days.
So you said 40 years. Congratulations, by the way. That's a huge, huge milestone. 40 years, I'm sure you've seen a lot. What were your most significant challenges that you faced during your career, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, well, there were a lot of challenges. I mean, 40 years is a long time. But I'll tell you, the first challenge we hit, we opened the doors of our firm. Well, actually, the first challenge was before we opened the doors of our firm. We wanted to start Massey-Knakal in 1986. And we were hotshot brokers, thought we were hotshot brokers, went down to our banker. I still remember the branch manager on Madison and must have been 46th, 47th. Was a woman named Nancy Stockwell. We showed up one day. We always used to chit-chat with her. Like, hey, Nancy, we want to start our own company. We need a $500,000 loan. Where do we sign? And, of course, she starts laughing at us and says, hey, guys, that's not the way it works. Go start your firm, have a 3-year track record, then come back and talk to us, and we'll work out some kind of a credit line or something. So we went back to the office all dejected. And for the next 2 years, we took money out of every deal we closed. You know, Paul and I, in those days, we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner together just about every day. And every day at breakfast, Paul would pull out his pen, and on the back of a napkin, we'd write all the deals we had under contract, how much we were going to make, how much we were going to take out of each deal. And
there's no software CRM, I guess, at that point.
No, definitely not. No.
Just going.
Look, let me tell you something. Back in the mid '80s, not only was there no CRM, there was no computer on your desk, no cell phone, no fax machine.
I can't even imagine. How do you even close?
The first fax machine was basically called Zap Mail, and FedEx had it. And what you would do is you'd bring a document to a FedEx office. They would effectively fax it to another FedEx office, and then it would be hand delivered. And that was $8 a page. But that was the first form of fax machine.
$8 a page.
But what you did, we had I had the
1980.
Brooks Brothers Day Timer, which was a little book you kept in your breast pocket, and you wrote all your appointments in there. And you carried around a roll of quarters because if you were waiting to show a building and somebody didn't show up, you went down to the corner and called them. I mean, it's really remarkable how things have changed in a relatively short period of time.
How did you do a closing? I mean, I think about like the 200 person email chain right now, right? Like, or 200 email chain. Like, if that's all getting mailed back.
Yeah, you sat in a room. Look, back in the old days, in a lot of ways, it actually worked a little better in some cases because a lot of our contract signings back in those days, you got the principals in a room, the attorneys were in a room, and you sat there, and you'd sit there for sometimes 10 hours, 12 hours, 16 hours, and you didn't leave until the contract was signed.
Wow.
And the attorneys would work on language and take it to the secretary. Secretary would type it up, bring it back in, they would review it. That was actually a great way to get it done. Now stuff goes back and forth, and people forget, and weeks go by. I actually prefer the old way of getting it done.
Wow.
It almost sounds like it was quicker to get deals signed, contracts signed in the old days.
Well, you had everybody, all the decision makers in a room,
And you're not leaving the room till it's done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
I remember we signed. I remember one night we signed a contract on what was the Simkowitz portfolio. It was called. It was a $109 million multifamily portfolio. We started that contract signing meeting at about 9 a.m. and I went home Friday night, or actually it was Saturday morning at 2 a.m.
Oh my goodness!
But we got the contract signed. It was a great thing. And I remember it was weird going home so late, but I was so pumped up that we had gotten the deal signed that it was a great feeling. But
That's amazing.
that was the way we did it back in those days.
So you go and you start your own brokerage, Paul, with your partner Paul,
Yep.
right? I mean, what you guys are going into the hardest real estate market by most intensive measures, right? And you guys are going to start your own. Talk me through, kind of that decision and what gave you guys the confidence to go and say, we're going to go compete with the big dogs.
Yeah, look, we didn't think we were going to compete with the big dogs. We said, you know what, we think we have a formula, a platform, a method of operating that's going to get traction with people. We saw in our little territories that we worked in, we would be competing against brokers who had been in the business for a decade or two. And we had only sold 3 buildings. And we'd go into an owner and say, yeah, we've only sold 3 buildings, but one was down the block, one was across the street, one was right next door to you. We know everything that's going on in this neighborhood, and we know who's buying, who's selling, what zoning changes are affecting value, what new developments are going on. We know this area cold, so we're going to be able to be a better advocate for you in terms of convincing buyers why they should pay more for your property. That got us great traction and got us up the curve really quickly. But it was in hindsight, the fact that we didn't get the bank loan was a blessing, because by the time we started the firm in November of '88. The stock market had crashed in October of '87. '88 was still a good year. The volume really didn't start to slow down until '89. But at the time, our burn rate was only $15,000 a month. If we had started in '86, the burn may have been 25 or 30 grand a month, and we wouldn't have been able to make it through the S&L crisis. As it was, we got to the point where we had $15,000 in the bank. We had no deals under contract, and we looked at each other and said, "What the heck do we do? Do we pay all the expenses next month and see what happens? Do we pay $5,000 a month for 3 months of the most important expenses to keep the lights on?" And we really didn't know what the heck to do. And we realized we had really good credit. So we went around to every bank and got a $2,000 credit card at this one and a $4,000 credit card at this one. Between the two of us, we amassed $60,000 in credit card debt. Ran the business on credit cards for about 2 years, and then had maxed out the credit cards. What? This was before the RTC really started forcing banks to dump stuff, which really didn't happen until late '93 and into '94. And we had the credit cards maxed out, had no money. We had a client who we had done a couple of deals with, a Forbes 400 guy. And this is going to sound just like an early iteration of Shark Tank, but we go to him and we say, "Mr. X, we need 75 grand. We've done some deals. You seem like you like us. Could you give us the 75,000?" This guy was worth hundreds of millions at the time. And he said, "I like you fellas. I'll give you the 75,000, but I want 50% of the stock in your business."
Wow.
So we weren't expecting that at all. So of course we walked back to the office, chin on our chest, looking down at the ground, and we're like, what the heck do we do? Paul's stepfather-in-law, Jack Holler, ran a mortgage brokerage business in New Jersey. So we set up a meeting with Jack. We go out and meet with him. "Jack, we need 75 grand. We'll give you 25% of the stock in our business." He says, "Guys, look, I'm going to give you the 75. I don't want the stock. Someday you're going to be very successful, and you'll be really upset that you gave me the stock. So I don't want the stock." I mean, just another talk about serendipity and good luck and everything. I mean, that was unbelievable of him to do. In fact, we named our Salesperson of the Year award after Jack and gave that out every year. Wow. But we got the loan from him. That kept us going. And then, slowly but surely, we started to get some bank work, started to get some RTC work. We were able to pay all those bills off. And then personally, the company was doing okay, but personally, I was running my life on credit cards probably for a total of 10 years. With my net worth fluctuating between 0 and minus 180,000. We had used the credit card so much that my credit was great. So personally, I got my lines up to $180,000. But I would be like 0, minus 40, minus 70, minus 120, close a deal, I'm back to minus 50. And, it was bouncing around in that range for a long time until probably about 1998 or 1999.
Wow. A decade of living off credit card debt.
Yeah, without a doubt.
The amount, I can't even fathom the amount of stress you were going through. How did you tolerate that?
It kind of, it didn't bother me so much because I just was so used to it that when I got back to being zero, I felt great. I felt like $1 million.
I'm rich.
So
rich.
it was like you just got so used to it. But the whole time we kept believing that what we were doing made sense. It was the right thing. We were gonna get there, and sure enough, we get to the point where we're starting to do really well. The recession of the early 2000s comes along, then 9/11 happens. And we did something that was a big inflection point for the company because a couple of things happened. One, we saw all these companies laying people off. Really great quality people were getting cut. Companies were downsizing. And at the same time, we had filled all our territories in Manhattan. So we said, okay, what do we do now? Do we start doing, we were only selling buildings. Our value proposition at the time was very straightforward. We only sell buildings. We only represent sellers. We only work on exclusives. We only work in Manhattan. So we said, what do we do now? Do we get into office leasing, store leasing? Do we do debt? Or do we go out to the boroughs? And we said, we don't know anything about those other disciplines. We know how to sell buildings. Let's go open up an office in Queens. And at the time, the boroughs weren't cool. Like most Manhattan brokers thought, if I go over the river, my shoes are going to get dirty. I'm not going to go out there. So we opened up in Queens. We opened up in Brooklyn. We went out right after 9/11. We said, you know what? New Yorkers are tough. We're going to come back from these attacks. There were some people leaving the city saying, oh, we're going to be bombed. And we hired a director of HR because Paul and I had been interviewing everybody up to that point. So we started with just the two of us. By 9/11, we had 21 people. We hired a director of HR, and within 2 years, we had 150 people at the firm.
Whoa.
So we basically went all in. We shoved all our chips into the center of the table, hoping that New York would recover. We believed it would. Fortunately, it did. And so we were in a position that when the market came back, our business just accelerated. I remember 2001 was the first time CoStar did a ranking of sales brokers in New York. And I remember we were number one, and Eastern Consolidated was number two. We were shocked because Peter Hausberg, Brian Israeti, Dawn Paris, they were good friends of ours, the nicest people in the world. And, we always thought that they were doing much more volume than us. We were shocked that we were number one. And from 2001 until the time we sold the company in 2014, we stayed at number one. And some years we were 3x, 4x what the number two company was doing, which made us feel really good because we were a little popcorn stand and competing against these global giants, but we were eating their lunch because our business model made so much sense and got so much traction. We believed in proof stacking, promoting the deals that we had done in a way that would get us more deals. And so it was a business plan that was fundamentally sound, made sense, enabled us to differentiate ourselves from every other broker, and that differentiation created a competitive advantage for us.
So talk me through that business plan, because you're basically a no name, 20 guys. All of a sudden you go all in on personnel. It sounds like there's a lot of good talent in the marketplace that you took advantage of, but it's not just the personnel. You guys had a strong value proposition. So what were you offering owners in New York that was so different than everybody else?
Yeah, well, look, the two main assets that a broker has are your knowledge and your time. You're always getting more knowledge. You can't make more time. So you have to use your time in a way where everything you're doing is accretive towards getting the next deal. In the 80s, when we started, the amount of publicly available information was not so great and not so accurate. So we adopted this geographic approach to the business where we put one broker in each small neighborhood. They got to know everything about that neighborhood. Like the example I used before, we sold all the buildings around the subject building we were pitching. That got a lot of traction with people because And if I find out about a building for sale in someone else's territory, I brought that territory expert in, and that guy knew his territory as well as I knew my territory. And so you'd go in to meet with the client. The client's very, very impressed with the local market knowledge and everything. So we spent all of our time, each broker, working in their neighborhood, getting to be the market expert, demonstrating that expertise. We focused on market presence even before we knew what market presence was. I've worked with a broker coach I have for 12 years now, and he told me, you have to focus on market presence. What's that? That's being top of mind with people. We were doing that all the time. We were doing market reports and newsletters before anybody even thought to do those. How many buildings are selling, what's the average price of the building selling, what's the average price per square foot, what are the cap rates. We tracked all this data before it was really in vogue to do that. And every time we got a listing, it got mailed out to everybody. Every time we sold a building, that information got mailed out to everybody. We got to the point before email became popular, we were sending out 3 million pieces of mail a year.
Whoa.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was... we were saturating the market. I'm doing work now. We sold MK in 2014. I'm doing work in Willets Point now for a couple of clients. And I don't know if you know Willets Point, but the parts of it are like a third world country. The streets are not paved. There are no utilities going to some parcels. And these owners generally own stuff. The owners in Willets Point only own in Willets Point. And I'd call them up and say, hey, it's Bob Knakal from JLL. And they're like, JL what? What's JLL? And I said, Bob Knakal, do you remember the old Massey-Knakal company? Oh, yeah, the green and white mail. How come you guys don't send me that mail anymore? So, it resonated with people because the mail went out every month. Somebody got a piece of hard mail from us, whether it was a market report, a postcard, information on a listing, a sale we did. And so we just fully saturated the market. Our newsletter went from... First newsletter we did was at the beginning of '89. It was an 11.5 by 17 sheet. It was 8.5 by 17, folded in half, copied on the copy machine. And we got that to the point where we had a 36-page newsletter where we were selling ads in it and all kinds of things. But and that newsletter circulation was over 300,000 at its peak. But it was a fundamentally sound business plan where we saturated the market. We had market knowledge and reports that were unparalleled, and it really resonated with people. And so, the years where we were selling 500 buildings a year, 600 buildings a year, the number 2 company was like barely over 100. It really was a very successful platform for us.
So I just want to be clear. You sold to Cushman or JLL?
To Cushman.
Cushman.
We sold to Cushman. We had 5-year contracts there. And in fact, interestingly, the decision to sell in 2014 was made in 2007. In 2007, we weren't thinking about selling the firm. CB approached us, offered us $50 million. We said, whoa, we got to think about this. And for a variety of reasons, that deal didn't happen. But what it did teach us was that when we did sell the firm, we'd be on 5-year service contracts. So we looked at it and said, well, Paul's turning 55 in 2015. These contracts are going to be perceived to have better value if we're in our 50s than if we're in our 80s. So in 2014, if the market doesn't stink, we should really think about selling. So 2014 rolls around, the market's rolling. It turned out that in 2014, 5,534 buildings were sold in New York City, which is an all-time record by more than 10%, and still is the highest total number of buildings that ever sold. And in our world, number of properties sold much more important than dollar volume of sales. The all-time record dollar volume was in 2015, which was $80.1 billion. But if you look back, absolutely the optimal, the best possible time to sell, through no fault or genius of our own, that decision was made in 2007. So the market was good. We went out, hired an investment banker, sold to Cushman. the closing was the New Year's Eve of 14. In October of 16, Cushman brought over the investment sales team from Easthill. That was a breach of our contracts. So based on that, we were able to shorten the contracts from 5 years to 3.5 years, got a couple of more bucks, a couple of other things.
Nice.
And so after 3.5 years, at the time Paul was running for mayor, I left Cushman, went to JLL. I brought 53 people with me, all of whom were with me back in the MK days also. So that's how I ended up at JLL.
Wow.
And in what year did you go to JLL? Was that
2018.
2018.
September of 18.
Wow.
That's an amazing story. I can't. It's just. I mean, it seems like Cushman at that time. They brought your whole team, and then you still kind of got best of both worlds. You have your team. You have, to me, it's like you kind of got the best of everything you could have wanted at that point.
Yeah. No. Look, it was a really nice setup for us when Cushman acquired the Easthill team. Our platform was doing more number of sales than anyone else. The Easthill guys were doing more dollar volume than anyone else, and they focused mainly on institutional stuff and office building sales, which was a donut hole in the Massey-Knakal platform. And for those two platforms not to be able to be put together, I think was a huge, huge missed opportunity. Maybe one of the biggest in the history of real estate, given what those two platforms were at the time, in New York history anyway. But it is what it is. We went on, and I'm still selling buildings today and loving what I do, and so all is well.
That's amazing.
I've been following you on social media for a while. One thing I see often is, I think it's the map room. Mm-hmm. Talk us through what is the map room?
Yeah, sure. Well, first, let's talk about social media a little bit, because I was, for many, many years, I was like, what the heck is this social media stuff? Why are people wasting their time on this? And for years, people were asking me, Bob, you should get on. It's great. You'll meet people. You have stories to tell. You should go on.
You do have great stories. You do have great stories.
Thanks. And so finally I cave in, and January 1st of this year, I said, let me give it a try. I'll try it for 3 months, see how it is. If it's good, I'll keep with it. But if not, 3-month trial. I've been blown away. And I give you story after story of relationships I have with people I've met, people I haven't talked to in 40 years. I had a fraternity brother of mine I hadn't talked to since college reach out. He's been buying medical office buildings for the past 30 years, wanted to sell the whole portfolio. It's just one thing after the next. So social media, I think, is awesome. I love it. But the map room. So I've always related to the Sanborn map of properties in New York much better than even looking at pictures of buildings. I look at the map speaks to me. I've been doing these maps, and my post on social media today was a picture 30 years ago of me having these maps on the wall behind my desk. And so the origin of the map room was that a big part of my practice is selling development sites. Sell a lot of land, and in order to analyze and do a valuation on land, you need to know what the supply pipeline is like for any particular product type. And remarkably, that information is very, very tough to find in New York. The most robust data set you'll find is of condo construction, how many condos are being brought to market. And you'll see that every company's report is very, very different. So it's like, what metrics are they using? What buildings are they counting? What aren't they counting? So for 10 years, I wanted to go do a count myself. And when it comes to office construction, hotel room construction, rental housing construction, there's no data sets at all. So I'm like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to count every building under construction so I know for myself what is out there.
Wow.
So, of course, you never have time to do it. You're so busy. I mean, traffic in the city, it takes you an hour to get across town today. So March of 2012, or March of 2020, we're told to go home for 2 weeks, and then COVIDs will go away, and then you come back, and of course, it's months go by, and nobody's back in town. But I moved out of New York. I got a call from a friend of mine who said, "Hey, I heard they're going to lock the city down. They're going to close the bridges and tunnels. Get out of town." I live in Manhattan. I have a country house up in Connecticut. So I grabbed my wife, and I'm like, "Look, let's grab our daughter, get up to Connecticut. I don't want to get stuck in the city." And so we head up to Connecticut, and I'm up there. I realize, hey, there's a couple of things I could use up here. So towards the end of March, I drive into the city to go to my apartment to pick some stuff up, and it was surreal.
Empty.
It was like a scene from a movie. You saw a couple of homeless people and a couple of cops, and there was nobody else around. And so I thought to myself, wow, if I'm ever going to walk and drive the city, now's the time to do it. So I basically came into the city. I made copies of the Sanborn maps in little sections, came into the city once a week, was driving around with either John Hageman, who's been my partner for 20 years, or one of the other guys on our team. We'd drive around, and I would park the car sometimes right in the middle of the street because there's no traffic. Get out, walk around for 20 minutes, with highlighters, highlighting everything, get in the car, go down 10 blocks, start, go in. And interestingly, the biggest problem we had doing it was that there was no place to go to the bathroom.
Oh, my God.
Because every store was closed. The restaurants were closed, fast food places. There was no place to go. We had to get in the car and go back to my apartment so I could go to the bathroom to get back to where we were going.
That's insane.
But so we have the highlighters. I'm highlighting every building under construction is green. Every single parcel development site I highlighted in orange. Potential assemblage sites I highlighted in yellow. Finish up the whole city, tape the whole thing together. That's the map. Then we've done probably 3,000 hours of research on those to determine which of the assemblage sites are higher quality than ones that aren't. Doing research on who the owners of all these properties were, and since we did the walking tour, we've been tracking every building permit that's been filed, every demolition permit, every foundation permit. So we're on top. Our pipeline is the most accurate. I guarantee is the most accurate pipeline that exists in the city today, and that really helps us when we're doing valuations on sites to know how much of each product type is coming online in a particular neighborhood. Sometimes it dictates on a commercial site whether it should be office or should be hotel. So it is in the brokerage business, information is key. In fact, we consider ourselves being in the information business, not in the real estate business. The real estate just happens to be the thing the information is based on. But it's the quality of the information we got from this process has been fantastic. And I get clients coming into the map room, and they don't want to leave. We can sit there for hours looking at different neighborhoods, looking at sites, talking about what's going on, and it's great. And every time somebody comes in, I have my highlighters out, and there's new things that they're telling me, and
Wow.
it's getting more and more robust as we go.
That's invaluable information, it sounds like.
Bob, I need to ask. I mean, you've seen and negotiated countless deals. Can you share some of your most memorable, influential negotiations you've been involved in?
Oh gosh. Well, I'll tell you a story of a transaction that I actually won the Robert Lawrence Award in the Real Estate Board's Most Ingenious Deal of the Year contest. And a small deal. I think one of the smallest to ever win. It was a building at 41 West 47th Street. That's the jewelry block between 5th and 6th and 47th. There, almost every business is a jeweler. This building happened to be a bookstore. The owner of the bookstore owned the building, converted a C Corp to an S Corp, and was telling everybody on the block, when my S Corp benefits kick in, I'm going to sell the building. So everybody knew for a long time he was going to sell. He calls me up. I give him a proposal. He hires me to represent him. And the the craziness that revolved around that deal was amazing. We'd have people come making bids, people offering cash and diamonds, cash and gold. And I tell Andy Brown was the owner. I tell Andy, hey, this guy offered, it's a bag of diamonds. He's he's offered me diamonds. And the other guy who offered gold, you offered me gold. And so we were marketing the building, and it seemed like somebody would make an offer, and then 5 minutes later somebody else would call offering like $200,000 less than that person offered. And we think that buyers had shills calling up, making lower bids than they bid to make their bid look better. And then it seemed like everybody in the market knew what was going on in terms of who was bidding, how much they were bidding. And what we found out was that one of the employees of the bookstore was being paid to go get the faxes off the fax machine and tell people what the bids were.
Wow.
So we figured this out. So we said, no more bids by fax. I'll send them over in a sealed envelope. And to top it off, we set a bid deadline. Andy goes to lunch at Burger's Deli, which is across the street from his building, and he's paying his check. And the cashier says, "Oh, Mr. Brown, I hear your bids are due today, and the high bid's going to be $5.5 million." So he's like, oh, "Okay, let's go." And we have all the bids come over in sealed bids. Mm-hmm. So we're in this back room, just he and I, opening the bids, and we had 30 bids. The two high bids were $5.5 million. So what the heck is going on here? This is crazy. So Andy says, "Bob, something's wrong. This cashier told me the high bid was going to be $5.5. What do we do?" So I said, "Well, look, we have two bids that are tied at the top, so we don't have a high bid. So what I suggest you do, Andy, go to your attorney, tell him to start drafting a contract. I can go back to every buyer and honestly say you were not the high bid. Because if you were tied with somebody else,
you're not the
you
highest.
weren't the high bid. You're one of the high bids.
A high
so
bid.
It was kind of a little finagling, but we basically, I called everybody, all the bidders. You were not the high bid, and we're drafting a contract. And I said, Andy, let's just don't talk to anybody. Just use that line. You weren't the high bid. We're drafting a contract. 4 days go by, 5 days go by, a week. Get a call from one of the bidders. Hey, so what would happen if I offered 5.7 for the property? I said, I don't know. We're drafting a contract. I'll talk to the owner. I'll get back to you. Don't call him back. A couple of days later, another guy calls. What would happen if I offered $5.9 million for the building? I don't know. I'll submit it. We'll get back to you. This goes on for about 3 weeks. We end up selling the building for $7.5 million.
What?
Whoa.
So that was an interesting story, but that's New York real estate for you. You never know what the heck is going to happen.
How many units was that building? Because
It was a bookstore on the first 2 floors, and then there was one apartment above where the owner lived.
How do you think the cashier knew?
No idea. Overhearing people, who knows?
So they were in cahoots. Nobody was supposed to go above 5.5. That's wow.
Well, her saying that to Andy got you another $2 million just about on the property.
Yep.
That's amazing.
You're doing multiple you're doing a lot of real estate transactions. But what it seems like to me is that even though this particular transaction was not your biggest sale, it was one of your run-of-the-mill, smaller deals for you, you put your time, effort, and energy to making sure your client got top dollar.
Yeah, look, at the end of the day, it's all about helping the client, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, one of the things I love about the way we approach the business is only representing sellers. As of last week, I've closed 2,259 deals. I exclusively represented the seller in 2,257 of those. So there were two deals where they were just fluky things. In one case, teachers came to us and said, we need to do a training center for our chairman wants to do this. We'll pay whatever we have to pay. We have to have something within this very small block. So we got a property for them, and then we had the Beretta Gun Company come to us and say, look, we need to buy a building on Madison Avenue between 60th and 72nd. We'll pay anything. Just we got to get a building. And so we found them a building. But those are the only two deals that we're not exclusively representing the seller. And when you're exclusively representing the seller, all you're doing is trying to maximize price. And I like that approach for a couple of reasons. One, we never have conflicts of interest. And number two, I never have to remember what I say to anybody. All I'm trying to do is maximize price all the time. And that's ultimately, it's about satisfying the client, making the client happy, helping them achieve their objectives. And we do whatever we have to do to make that happen.
I love that. I love that. So you would attribute exclusively representing sellers as part of the reason why your sellers have such a great and positive experience with you. What are some other things that you did to build such a positive reputation in the industry?
Yeah, well, I think part of it, I really, the lack of conflict, I think, made people comfortable. The fact that we always demonstrated we had the ability to successfully represent them by this proof stacking. Proof stacking is, you put together a summary of every transaction you do, and you use that to help get the next one. And after a while, you have a whole stack of these things, and you can go say, see, look, I've done this. I've helped people in similar circumstances. And so I think that's a way that people will come to rely on you. They trust you. People will talk to who they know and like. They'll hire who they trust. So, and focusing on your reputation is also very, very important in a service business. But, the fact that we were only representing sellers and all we wanted to do at all times is just get the highest prices possible. If you think about it, I always told people, look, if you hire me, I'm going to push to get the highest possible price because I only represent sellers. If I sell your property at a low price, I'm out of business. I need to sell for a high price. What I want to do is get such a high price. I want to go out and get 200 people interested in your building. I want to sell it to one and have the other 199 say, how the heck did they get such a high price? If I ever sell, I'm going to use those guys.
That's exactly what I was thinking just now.
And we have clients who will say to us, look, Bob, I will never buy a property from you. But if I ever sell, you'll be my first call. And that's okay. I'm okay with that because you can't be all things to all people. And in fact, it got to the point where in 05, 06, an appraisal company, Miller Cicero, would call us for comps all the time. And one time, John Cicero says, Bob, how come your sales are always so much higher than everything else in the market? I said, I explained the way we do things. And they actually did a study and showed that our transactions produced prices that were 31% above the rest of the market.
No way.
And Miller Cicero called this the Massey-Knakal premium. For 2 years, they published it, and of course, we published the heck out of this. They had to stop publishing it because the other brokers wouldn't cooperate with them and give them information because it was as if they were advocating for us.
There's no better proof than that.
Yeah, and that's a third party. That was not our data.
Data.
That's a third-party appraisal firm saying that our sales were 31% higher in price than the rest of the market.
That's crazy.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. Bob, you might be the only person I call when it comes to figuring out what's going on with New York City development trends. Are there any specific trends or developments you foresee in the future in New York City?
Well, I think the biggest problem I see on the development front is that while every politician says they want rents to be more affordable for people, every single piece of legislation that's either been implemented or ignored since 2018 has done nothing but exerted upward pressure on rents. So if you're a free market tenant living in New York and you feel you're paying too much, just blame your local politician, blame your assembly person, your council person, your mayor, your governor, your local senator. It's policy that is exerting upward pressure on rents because there's no new supply. And even if you believe that an economics 101 textbook is capitalist propaganda, look no further than the pandemic. People were moving out of the city. Vacancy was high, which effectively is supply increasing. Rents dropped by 30%. You want rents to be more affordable, create more supply. But what do? You don't renew the 421A. There's no tax abatement program. There's zero rental housing being constructed now. There's a huge air bubble in the pipeline. You enact a rent regulation system where you marginalize the MCI and the IAI program such that you have tens of thousands of rent-stabilized apartments that are vacant and nailed shut because it doesn't make any sense to, if you think about just that one program, I'll take you back to 1977, Yankees, Dodgers, World Series, Reggie Jackson's hitting his home runs, Goodyear blimp pans out from Yankee Stadium, 6 fires going on within 3 blocks of the stadium. That was happening because in those days, the dilapidation rate in New York City housing was 14%, meaning 14% of all units were uninhabitable.
Wow.
So it made more sense for somebody to burn their building down than to invest in it, collect the insurance money, go on your way. So smartly, the city implemented the major capital improvement program and the individual apartment improvement program, and that incentivized the private sector to dump tens of billions of dollars into the housing stock, such that in 2019, the dilapidation rate was 0.04%.
Wow.
Right? So what did the politicians do? They marginalized both of those programs such that there's no incentive for the private sector to invest in the housing stock. A rent-stabilized apartment becomes vacant. It's nailed shut. It's not being rented to anybody. Again, constraining supply. So you have no tax abatement program. You have policy that is disincentivizing investment in the housing stock. The quality of the housing stock is deteriorating. There's no new housing being created. I mean, what the heck are you thinking? It's the simplest solution. Every time I speak to a politician, I say, you want to solve New York City's housing issues, all you have to do is increase supply. And there are so many different ways to do it, converting offices to residential, lifting the 12 FAR cap on residential density, changing zoning districts, giving bonuses for rental construction as opposed to condo construction, a million different things that could be done, but they say they want rents to be lower, but yet all of their actions are exactly the opposite.
That's great insight, Bob. I appreciate that. Do you think that there's going to be any change on the political scene that's going to make a positive impact on this issue?
Well, you would think that the political pendulum swings back and forth. For most of my career, the New York State Assembly was always a majority of what I'll describe as non-friendly real estate to real estate people. And the Senate always had a very slim majority one way or the other. And even when the Democrats had a majority, there was an independent Democratic caucus that voted with the Republicans. Today, there is a supermajority of non-friendly to real estate folks in the Senate also. So it may take longer for that pendulum to swing back. But I will tell you that with the disincentive to invest in the housing stock and the housing stock quality deteriorating, those people are going to get pissed at some point and are going to start, complaining. And it's all an issue of policy. So I think it will change. But that's one sector. In the rental housing sector of development in New York, you have a huge air bubble, no new starts. Last month, there were no new building permits at all filed in New York. First time I can ever remember that happening.
Wow.
You have, on the condo front, condo land in Manhattan is selling, but values are down probably 20 to 30% just since last September because of the increase in interest rates. Lending spreads have gotten very wide. And so construction loan today is going to be 10% plus or minus, even with very, very low, 50, 55% LTC. So it's expensive, but yet deals are getting done in that space. In the hotel market, very, very little hotel land selling because a lot of the hotels are available for sale in New York at lower prices per square foot than the land value. So In the office market, office is interesting, probably the most challenged. There's a big difference between new construction, Class A office, and everything else. But there's just not a lot of land trades in that office sector. But there are definitely challenges out there, but I do sense that for most of the market, for all segments, other than office, I think that at some point next year, things are going to turn around. In fact, I think the retail market is already turning around, but retail has been taking it on the chin for many, many years now. But it's generally perceived that retail rents have stopped going down. Leasing activities picking up, and for the first time in 5 years, we're getting investors calling us saying, "Hey, what retail properties do you have for sale?" So I think that retail is already turning the corner a little bit.
Do you feel like most of this is just a function of interest rates and sellers maybe having expectations what their buildings are worth, and buyers not being able to make sense of it with current debt options? Or
Look, interest rates are important. I think if you look over the long term, the correlation to cap rates is much more closely aligned with the flow of capital than interest rates. I think the flow of capital and interest rates are also very highly correlated. But the fact is, it's the flow of capital is not as robust as it has been. So there is a need to have your cap rate be closer to lending rates because the flow of capital is disrupted the way it is. But I think that if you want to sell today, you're selling at a price that is lower because the cap rate's higher.
Yeah.
Bob, you have the career that every young aspiring real estate professional wants to have. Just speaking personally, I am working my tail off, right? And I just want to ask, how did you manage a work-life balance and avoid burnout over the last 40 years?
Yeah, well, I think work-life balance is the most challenging thing for all of us. And I think that it's also, there's a different answer for everybody. So when you look at all the things that you want to try to balance in your life, your work, your personal life, your family, your friends, your health, your faith, all the different aspects of your life, it's a different balance for everybody, and the balance also is different at different points in your life. I think when you're starting out in a career, and probably for your first several years, maybe up to 10 years, you really don't have and probably shouldn't have a work-life balance. A kid coming out of college that says, "Oh, well, I want to work, but I also want to enjoy myself," and that's off base. You have to jump in feet first, and just there's not a live work balance at the beginning of your career. But over time you adjust and you figure out what the most important things are for you personally. And I think the great exercise I read about that you do to determine what your right balance is take 5 people, different aspects of your life, maybe your spouse or a family member, a friend, somebody that you went to college with, somebody on your country club or your community, somebody from your church or synagogue, and pretend that you died. And those people are going to write a eulogy about you. Write those eulogies, what you want those people to say about you, and that actually is the blueprint for the way you want to live your life. Wow. And it will be very insightful. I've done this a couple of times. It's very insightful, and it will show you, I'm not spending enough time doing this. I should be spending more time doing that, less time doing this. And it really is, it's your personal blueprint for your own work-life balance.
Wow.
I love that. That's great advice.
That's amazing. I've never thought.
I've never heard that, but
Yeah,
that's
me
amazing.
neither.
Do it. I'm telling you, it's going to flip you out when you sit there and you write this stuff down and think about, okay, well, what's Joe going to say? What's Sally going to say about me at my funeral? And all of a sudden, you're like, wow, this is all that stuff. That's what you really want for yourself, right? So that will guide what you do, how you do it, how much you spend doing each thing, and it's a great exercise.
That
It's
might be
amazing.
one of the best pieces of advice I've ever heard.
Yeah.
I was gonna ask you for your last piece of advice just now, but that I think that was a bomb just now.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Bob, it's been a pleasure. Is there any parting words, anything that you'd like to put out to the audience that maybe we didn't cover?
Look, I think real estate is just such a great business. It's one that you never have to retire from. I always say I don't think I'll ever retire, and I talk for a living, so it's not manual labor. I think I'll be able to talk for a while, hopefully. But just try to. I guess I love to read books about a bunch of different topics, about psychology, persuasion, selling, human behavior. One of the great books that I've read is Jim Collins' Good to Great. And what Collins says is that every great company has a hedgehog concept. And that hedgehog concept is they identify the thing that they believe they can do better in the world than anybody else.
Right.
And every decision they make goes back to how is that going to help us get there? And I think for all of us, you guys at your company, or if you're individual or whatever, you want to figure out where do you want to go, where do you want to be, who do you want to be, how do you want to get there, and then if you have that hedgehog concept and everything you do is focused on attaining that position, then it makes the decision-making process relatively easy. Because you guys will be sitting around saying, all right, should we go left or right? And then you'll think about, okay, ultimately the objective is to get there. Definitely right is going to get us there much sooner than left. And it's a good thing. So I think everybody identify what your hedgehog concept is, and then live your life around, achieving that goal. And it'll make it much more attainable, I think.
Amen. Bob, this was hands down my favorite podcast ever. You've shared so much gold. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
No, it's great to be with you guys, and I wish you tremendous, tremendous luck and success.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for those, if anybody wants to find you, reach out to you, just Bob Knakal. I'm sure if you Google it, they'll find a million ways to find
you
you.
always email me at bob.knakal@jll.com, or I'm on social media all over the place. I don't know what my handles are, but Google Bob Knakal and you'll find me.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Bob.